I can still hear his voice as if it happened yesterday. My own father, the man I thought would always protect me, looked straight into my eyes and said, "You'll handle it yourself." Then he turned around and walked away. No hesitation, no second glance, just the sound of his footsteps fading while my world collapsed. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Mom would say I was born an adult, organizing my siblings' schoolwork, calming arguments, making sure the bills were paid when Dad was away on business trips. I didn't mind, not at first. It felt like I had a purpose, like I was holding the family together. But deep down, I always believed that if I ever reached my breaking point, my father would step in, that he would be my safety net. The breaking point came the night my mother ended up in the hospital. I was 21, juggling college classes and a part-time job. I remember the phone call, my younger brother's voice, frantic, telling me Mom had collapsed at dinner. I dropped everything and rushed to the ER. She was pale, tubes already connected, doctors moving quickly. My hands were shaking as I tried to fill out the paperwork. That's when Dad finally arrived. For a brief second, relief washed over me. He was here. He'd take control. He'd tell me what to do. But instead, he glanced at the clipboard in my hand, then at me, and said those words that would carve themselves into my memory. "You'll handle it yourself." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold. It was final. Like he had already decided I didn't need him anymore. I wanted to scream at him, to beg, to tell him I couldn't do this alone. But something inside me froze. Maybe it was pride, maybe shock, maybe both. I just nodded, even though my chest was burning. He turned away, asked a nurse for coffee, and left me there, 21 years old, signing medical consent forms I barely understood, praying I wasn't making a mistake that could cost my mother her life. That night was the first time I realized my father wasn't the hero I had painted in my head. He was just a man who believed his daughter could carry the weight of the world because she always had. But what he didn't see, or refused to see, was that I was already drowning. And that was only the beginning. Mom pulled through the first crisis, but the bills didn't wait. The doctors talked about surgery, long-term medication, and weeks of recovery. As they spoke, I glanced at Dad, expecting him to step in, to ask the practical questions. But he just sat there with his arms crossed, staring past the doctors as if none of this was his concern. When the conversation ended, I whispered, "Dad, what are we going to do?" He didn't even look at me. "Figure it out," he muttered. That was his entire contribution. So I figured it out. I called the insurance company, dealt with the hospital administrator, and rearranged my class schedule so I could take Mom to follow-up appointments. My brother and sister were too young to carry much of the load, and Dad? He disappeared into work, coming home late, eating silently, and locking himself in his office. It was as if the man had built a wall so high that none of us could reach him. At first, I told myself he was just stressed, that men sometimes shut down when things get hard. But deep down, it felt like abandonment. Every night, I would collapse on my bed after hours of phone calls, paperwork, and taking care of my siblings. I cried into my pillow so they wouldn't hear me. The bitterness grew slowly, like rust spreading under fresh paint. I noticed things I had ignored before. How Dad always let Mom be the one to soothe our fears. How he rarely attended school events unless Mom pushed him. How he lived in the same house with us, but we were strangers sharing walls. One evening, after a particularly brutal day where the insurance denied part of Mom's treatment, I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered him in the kitchen. "Why won't you help me? She's your wife. We're your kids. Why do you act like it's all on me?" He didn't even flinch. He opened the fridge, poured himself a glass of water, and said, "Because you're capable. More capable than anyone else here." For a second, I thought it was a compliment. But the way he said it, detached, almost careless, made me realize it wasn't admiration. It was an excuse for him to step back while I burned myself out. That night, I stopped waiting for him to change. I stopped hoping he'd suddenly step up. But I also started building a wall of my own, one brick at a time. And that wall would later save me, in a way he never could. By the third month of Mom's recovery, I had become a machine. Wake up early, get my siblings ready for school, attend my classes, run errands for the hospital, pick up extra shifts at work, collapse into bed sometime past midnight. I was 21, but I felt 40. What haunted me most wasn't the exhaustion. it was the silence between Dad and me. He'd pass me in the hallway, nod once, and disappear into his study. Sometimes I'd catch him watching the news while I balanced the checkbook on the dining room table. I wanted to scream at him, "Don't you see me drowning? Don't you care?" But the words never came. One night, after paying a stack of bills, I noticed my hands trembling so badly I couldn't hold the pen. My little sister, barely 12, came into the room with wide eyes. "Why are you always crying, Anna?" she whispered. I hadn't even realized tears were rolling down my face. I pulled her close, told her it was nothing, just tiredness. But inside, something cracked. I kept remembering that night in the hospital, the clipboard in my hand, Dad's cold words, the way he walked away. That memory played on repeat, like a broken record. And every time it did, the warmth I once felt for him faded a little more. I started noticing things about him I had been blind to before. How he avoided conflict by pretending it wasn't his problem. How Mom covered for him for years, excusing his absences at birthdays, his missed promises. She always said, "That's just how your father is." But when he told me to handle it myself, I finally understood that was who he was. Not a protector, not a leader, just a man who knew how to disappear when it mattered. The first real fracture came when I needed money for Mom's new round of medication. I had already maxed out my credit card, sold old clothes, even pawned my laptop. With shaking hands, I approached him. "Dad, I can't cover this one. It's $600. Please, can you help?" He didn't even hesitate. "No." Just that. One syllable that echoed through me like a gunshot. I stared at him, waiting for an explanation. He finally said, "If I give in now, you'll never learn how to stand on your own 2 feet." For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the kitchen tiles. My mother was sick, my siblings were terrified, and somehow my father thought this was a lesson. A lesson in independence. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Something colder took root inside me that night. A voice in my head said, "Fine, I'll do it myself. And when I succeed, it'll be in spite of you, not because of you." That's the night I stopped being his daughter in my heart. I was still living under his roof. But in every other way, I was already on my own. I picked up every shift I could. Nights at the diner, weekends at the bookstore, tutoring sessions squeezed in between classes. My body was running on caffeine and adrenaline, but strangely, I began to feel stronger. I was no longer waiting for anyone to rescue me. Every dollar I earned felt like proof that I could survive without him. But the resentment kept growing. One Sunday, after a 12-hour shift, I came home to find Dad watching a football game in the living room, a plate of nachos on his lap. I was still in my grease-stained uniform, my feet aching so badly I could barely stand. I lingered at the doorway, staring at him. My father, relaxed, comfortable, while I carried everything he had abandoned. "Dad," I finally said, my voice shaking, "do you ever think about how much this is costing me?" He muted the TV slowly, like I was interrupting something far more important. "Life's hard, Anna. Better you learn it now than later." That was it. No acknowledgement, no gratitude, no apology. Just a generic piece of wisdom, delivered like he was a sage instead of a coward. That night, I sat by Mom's bedside. She was getting better, her color returning, her smile weak but present. She touched my hand and whispered, "You've been my rock." Her words broke me, not because they were untrue, but because they highlighted the absence of the man who was supposed to be her rock. I wanted to ask her why she still loved him, why she still defended him. But when she smiled at me with tired eyes, I couldn't burden her with that truth. The breaking point with Dad came a few weeks later. My younger brother got into a fight at school. He had punched another kid who mocked him for having a sick mom. When the principal called, I left work early to meet with them. My brother sat in the corner, eyes red, fists still clenched. I looked around and realized Dad hadn't even bothered to come. It was just me again, signing papers, apologizing, trying to calm the storm. On the way home, I asked my brother why he snapped. He said, "Because I'm sick of people saying we don't have a dad." Those words lodged in my chest like glass shards. Because in truth, he was right. We didn't have a dad, not in the way that mattered. We had a man who lived in the same house, but refused to shoulder any of the pain or responsibility. That night, I confronted him again. I told him what the principal said, what my brother confessed. I thought maybe this time, he'd wake up, realize how much damage his absence had caused. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "Boys fight. You handled it." I stared at him, my hands trembling, my throat tight. It was then that I realized he wasn't going to change. Ever. And if I wanted to protect my siblings, if I wanted to protect myself, I would have to prepare for a life entirely separate from him. The plan to separate myself from him didn't come overnight. It grew quietly, like a seed I didn't even know I had planted. Every time he brushed me off, every time he walked away, I added one more reason to leave. I started saving, not just for bills, but for an escape. I tucked away tips from the diner, extra pay from tutoring, anything I could scrape together. Sometimes it was just $10. But in my head, each crumpled bill was a piece of freedom. At college, my professors noticed the change in me. I wasn't just a student anymore, I was a survivor. I carried myself differently, more determined, more focused. One professor, Dr. Harris, pulled me aside after class. "You've got fire in you," he said. "Have you thought about applying for internships? Maybe something out of state." For the first time, I considered it seriously. Out of state. Away from Dad. Away from the constant reminder of his betrayal. But leaving wasn't simple. Mom still needed me. My siblings still leaned on me. I felt trapped in a cycle of responsibility. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling, torn between guilt and longing. One evening, my little sister crawled into my bed. "Anna," she whispered, "do you think Dad even loves us?" The question stabbed deeper than anything he had ever said. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course he does. He just doesn't know how to show it. But even as I said it, I didn't believe myself. Weeks later, another blow landed. I overheard him on the phone with a colleague, laughing. "My daughter's got it handled. She's practically the head of the household now. Makes my life easy." Easy. That word echoed like thunder. All my sleepless nights, all the tears, the exhaustion, the sacrifices to him, it was just convenience. That was the moment I stopped feeling like his daughter altogether. I wasn't going to wait for his approval, his help, or his acknowledgement. If he wouldn't give me love, then I would build a life so strong, so unshakable, that I'd never need it. And when I finally left, he wouldn't even see it coming. The first real opportunity to leave came sooner than I expected. Dr. Harris forwarded me an internship posting at a financial firm 2 states away. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even paid well, but came with housing. Housing, a roof that wasn't under my father's rules, silence, or judgment. I filled out the application at midnight, whispering prayers into the glow of my laptop screen. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a different life. A tiny apartment with my own key. Meals where no one raised their voice. Nights where I didn't cry myself to sleep because of him. When the acceptance email arrived, I nearly dropped my phone. My heart raced as I read it 3 times, just to make sure it wasn't a mistake. I had 3 months to prepare. 3 months to save, to plan, to tell my family. Telling Mom was the hardest. She was stronger now, walking on her own, managing light chores again. One evening, as I helped her with dinner, I told her softly, I got an internship. Out of state. Her spoon froze mid-stir. She looked at me, eyes wide, then softened. "You deserve it," she whispered. But then her gaze clouded. "I don't know what we'll do without you." I hugged her, holding back tears. "You'll be okay. I'll still call every day. But Mom, if I don't leave now, I never will." She didn't argue. She just nodded, tears glistening, and kissed my forehead. Telling Dad was different. He was at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone. I placed the acceptance letter in front of him. "I'm moving out in 3 months." He barely glanced at it. "Do what you want." No congratulations. No questions. No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. And strangely, that was liberating. His indifference was the final push I needed. Over the next few weeks, I prepared quietly. Sold textbooks I didn't need, took double shifts, bought a second-hand suitcase. My siblings noticed the changes, and when I told them, their reactions split me in 2. My brother looked proud, like he finally saw me as more than just the stand-in parent. My sister clung to me, crying, begging me not to go. I promised I'd visit, that I'd send letters, that this wasn't goodbye. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the house I grew up in. The peeling paint, the creaky porch, the shadows in the hallways. So many memories lived there, some good, many painful. And then I thought of his words, "You'll handle it yourself." He was right. I had handled it. All of it. But what he never realized was that by forcing me to carry everything alone, he had also forced me to grow stronger than he'd ever be. When dawn came, I zipped my suitcase, hugged Mom and my siblings tightly, and walked out the door. Dad didn't even come downstairs to say goodbye. And that told me everything I needed to know. The drive to the new city felt surreal. I watched the highway stretch endlessly, the weight of my old life shrinking in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I wasn't running errands or rushing between jobs or dragging myself to a hospital. I was running towards something, my own future. The internship apartment was small, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt an unfamiliar wave of peace. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was freedom. The first week at the firm was overwhelming. Suits everywhere, people talking fast, phones ringing nonstop. I felt out of place, a girl who had learned survival in a kitchen stacked with medical bills, not in a corporate office. But then I realized if I could navigate hospitals, debt collectors, and a father who refused to help, I could navigate this. I worked harder than anyone, stayed late, asked questions, took on extra projects. My supervisor noticed. "You're sharp," he said one night as we both packed up. "Where'd you learn to handle pressure like that?" I almost laughed. If only he knew. The months passed, and I grew into a version of myself I barely recognized. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building something. For the first time, the world felt wide open. But freedom didn't erase the past. Some nights, I'd lie in my tiny bed and replay Dad's words, his indifference, his empty chair at the kitchen table. The anger would return like a storm. And yet, beneath it, there was also pity. Because I realized something. By refusing to carry the weight of his own family, my father had lost us long before I ever walked out the door. He would never know my triumphs, never be part of the milestones I worked so hard for. That was his punishment, living in the silence he created. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment watching the city lights, my phone buzzed. A text from my brother. "Proud of you, sis. Wish you were here today. Dad yelled at me for skipping football practice, but I told him I'd rather be like you than like him." I read it 3 times, tears stinging my eyes. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just saved myself. I was giving my siblings a different blueprint, proof that they weren't doomed to repeat his failures. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because I was finally rewriting the story he had tried to trap me in. And I wasn't finished yet. A year into the internship, everything began to shift. What was supposed to be temporary turned into a job offer. A real salary, benefits, the chance to finally stop living from paycheck to paycheck. I remember staring at the contract, my hands trembling, knowing I was about to step into a life my father never thought I could build without him. I signed it without hesitation. The first thing I did was send money home to Mom. She cried on the phone, telling me she didn't want to take anything from me, but I insisted. "It's not charity," I told her. "It's payback for all the nights you carried us when he didn't." She went quiet, and I knew she understood exactly who I meant. My siblings visited during spring break. I showed them my tiny apartment, cooked spaghetti on my little stove, and we laughed until our stomachs hurt. It was the first time in years I saw them relax without the shadow of Dad's disapproval hanging over us. My sister even said, "It feels like we can breathe here." That stuck with me. Breathe. Something so simple, yet something we hadn't been allowed to do under his roof. But just when I thought I had closed that chapter, Dad forced his way back into my life. It started with a voicemail. His voice, gruff but strained, "Anna, call me back. It's important." I ignored it. Then came another and another. Finally, Mom called. "Sweetheart, it's your father. He's been laid off. Things are complicated." Complicated. That was Mom's way of softening reality. I knew what it meant. The man who told me to handle it myself had finally hit something he couldn't handle alone. Against my better judgment, I called him. His voice was smaller than I remembered, like air leaking out of a balloon. "I need help," he said plainly. "I thought maybe you could," he trailed off, as if ashamed to finish the sentence. For a moment, I almost laughed. The irony was so sharp it nearly cut me. The man who abandoned me at the hospital, who refused to pay for Mom's medicine, who let me drown just to prove a point, now wanted my help. I didn't answer right away. My silence stretched so long he finally said, "You've always been strong, Anna. Stronger than me. That's why I thought you'd manage." It was the closest thing to an admission I had ever heard from him. Not an apology, not really, but a crack in the armor of the man who had built his life on walking away. I ended the call without a promise. My chest was tight, torn between anger and the faintest pull of old loyalty. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, staring at the city lights again. For years, I had wanted him to feel what I felt, abandoned, powerless, desperate. And now he finally did. But the real question was, would I walk away like he did, or would I prove that I was nothing like him? I didn't sleep that night. His voice kept replaying in my head, weaker, older, almost broken. A part of me wanted to slam the door on him forever. He had earned it. He had left me to suffocate under responsibilities that weren't mine. Why should I give him air now? But another part of me, the part Mom raised, whispered that helping didn't mean forgiving. It meant choosing the kind of person I wanted to be. I called Mom the next morning. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, though I already knew her answer. She sighed. "Anna, your father made choices, and he'll have to live with them. But you need to make choices too. The question is, do you want to carry bitterness, or do you want to move on?" Move on. Two small words that weighed more than any bill I'd ever paid. I agreed to meet him. We chose a diner halfway between my city and theirs. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. His shoulders hunched, his hair grayer, his eyes tired. For the first time, he looked human, not the towering figure who had cast shadows over my childhood. He didn't waste time. "I need money. Just until I get back on my feet." There it was. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Just need. I stared at him, searching his face for something. Regret, guilt, love. Anything. But all I saw was expectation. He still thought I'd carry him, the way I carried everyone else. "Do you remember what you told me at the hospital?" I asked quietly. He frowned. "What?" "You looked me in the eyes and said, 'You'll handle it yourself.' Then you walked away. I was 21. Mom was in the ER. I was terrified. And you left me there." He shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "That night," I continued, "I did handle it. I handled everything. And I became someone you'll never understand because I built myself without you." His lips parted, but no words came. I reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was a check, not enough to save him, but enough to buy time. "This isn't for you," I said firmly. "It's for Mom, so she doesn't have to carry your mess. But after this, we're done. Don't ever call me asking for more." His hand hovered over the envelope, shaking slightly. For once, he looked smaller than me. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out without looking back. As I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something. He had taught me nothing about love or responsibility. But in his absence, I had taught myself everything. And maybe that was the greatest revenge of all. Walking out of that diner felt like walking out of a cage I hadn't even realized I was still in. For years, I had been carrying his words like chains. "You'll handle it yourself." At first, they felt like a curse. But now, I saw them for what they really were, a key. Because I had handled it. Alone. And in doing so, I had built a life he could never touch. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from him again. Mom updated me quietly that he was looking for odd jobs, trying to scrape by. I felt no triumph in that, no joy. Just a strange, calm acceptance. He was reaping the silence he had sown. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. Promotions, a bigger apartment, new friends who became chosen family. I started mentoring younger interns at work, and one of them once asked me, "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" I smiled and said the truth, because I've already lived through worse. Every milestone I reached, I celebrated with Mom and my siblings. They cheered the loudest because they had seen the storms I walked through. My father was just absent, a shadow fading from the edges of our story. Sometimes, late at night, I would still think of him. I'd remember being that terrified 21-year-old in the hospital, begging silently for him to step up. And I'd remember the way he walked away. But now, instead of breaking me, that memory sharpened me. It reminded me that strength isn't always given. Sometimes, it's forged in the fire of abandonment. I don't hate him anymore. Hatred would mean he still holds space inside me. Instead, I carry only the lesson that family isn't defined by blood, but by those who stay when things get hard. And as for me, I'll never walk away from the people I love. I'll never let them feel the silence I once felt, because I know what it's like to beg for someone to stay and hear only footsteps leaving. And I swore to myself on that night in the hospital that I'd be different. And I am.